Welcome back, guys, to another exciting episode. What's the common theme with these baits here in my hands? You guys notice anything that might be similar? All right, maybe not with those ones, but what about with these ones here? Anything that stands out that all four baits have in common? Well, today we are going to be talking about a secret Japanese technique, or really a technique that it doesn't seem like a lot of guys are talking about, but it's a technique that I've been utilizing in my own fishing for years and years and years now, and I guess I've never really done like a standalone breakdown video of what this technique is. And so today I'm going to be taking the time, and that technique is called the dead walk. If you guys are ready, let's get right to today's video.
Yosha. Yosha. Oh, でかい。でかい。よっしゃ。よっしゃ。でっか。
Nice. Right here in these toolies, baby. That was sick. First D3 fish, baby. That was sick. That new Raga, baby. Garuda-bus. Sugoi. Now, if you've been a fan of this channel and you've watched a lot of my videos, you know by now that I talk about the dead walk quite a bit. And I think a lot of guys still don't really understand what the dead walk is and have a lot of questions about it. So in today's video, I'm basically going to be going over what the dead walk is. We're going to be asking, I guess, the 5 main questions: the who, what, when, where, how. Yeah, that's 5. And hopefully answer a lot of questions about the dead walk. So I guess to start off, we're going to have to talk about what is the dead walk. Now, the dead walk is a technique that I first heard about it coming from Japan, which maybe other guys have talked about it before over here in the States or somewhere else, but the term dead walk is a term that I picked up from the Japanese bros. And basically, the dead walk is an action or technique to where you can get a bait to kind of walk on itself in place, kind of like this, side to side. And the dead walk is a technique that is basically done with any bait that has a lip on it and is a floating lure. So all of these baits that you guys just saw are floating swim baits. Now, that's going to come up really important later on, but just know that it's normally a lure that has a lip or bill and is a floating lure. So with that in mind, the dead walk essentially is basically just an action that you impart on a lure for specific situations. Now the question is, how do we impart the dead walk on a lure? Just a quick note that the dead walk can be performed with any bait, whether it's like a single joint like this Clash 9 or a multi-jointed bait like this Megabass Garuda. The number of joints doesn't really matter. You just need a floating bait with a bill. So you're gonna grab whatever setup that you have, whatever lure that you have, you're going to cast out the bait. And I kind of recommend when you first start out to kind of keep it close to you so you can see what the bait is doing. And basically what you're going to do is give the rod light twitches to where the bait will end up kind of going side to side on itself. back and forth, and you kind of get into like a rhythm with it. And I normally use just the rod and then pick up the slack with the reel. So I'm using the rod to twitch, but at the same time, I'm kind of reeling up the slack so I can get another twitch in there. Some baits you're gonna have to go much lighter on, especially if you downsize the lure. Some other lures that are much larger, you're gonna need to twitch it a little bit harder. So it kind of just depends on what lure that you're fishing with and depending on the size of it, which can be the tricky part when it comes down to perfecting the dead walk. Some guys just don't have the cadence exactly down, so you might get one walk, two walk, and then it kind of like doesn't do anything to the next one or blows out. Like, getting the cadence down is the most important thing, and that's why being able to see what you're doing while giving the action is super important to kind of fully understand what the bait is doing. So when you do make that long cast, you kind of have a rough idea of how much input you have to do. And obviously that might change from a long cast to a much shorter distance, but just for the basics, make a small pitch near you to where you can see the bait and try twitching it with the rod, and it's light twitches. In my years of trying the dead walk with many different baits, I've only found maybe like 15 to 20% of the baits that fit in that criteria of being a floating bait with the bill. Only about 15 to 20% of them, it's basically just impossible to dead walk on a consistent level. Now, there's some baits where I'm like, this is not a very good dead walking bait, just because I think the joint's different or the weighting system is different. But for the most part, with enough time and practice out on the water or in a pool or whatever it is, you can get a lot of these baits to get that desired action correctly. Now the question goes over, when do I pick up the dead walk? The dead walk I find to be very similar to like a jerk bait, when you would want to use a jerk bait. So normally in the winter, spring, you kind of lay off of it during the summer months, and then you kind of pick it back up sometime in the fall, and then obviously it transitions right back into winter. I find it to be a very similar action to a jerk bait, where you jerk, you give it a pause. Jerk, pause. Jerk, pause. And it's the same thing with the dead walk. Twitch, pause. Twitch, pause. Now, obviously, you can go out like right now during the summer and throw the dead walk. I just find that during the summer months, these fish, they want to chase down bait. So they want something that's kind of moving a little bit faster, that doesn't give them a pause. And it's very similar to like how a lot of guys don't believe a jerk bait is a very good bait to fish in the summer. I personally never ever fished a jerk bait in the summer. I'd rather just go to like a square bill, something that kind of gives more of a reaction instead of something that kind of pauses in their face. And again, of course, you can catch jerk bait fish or dead walk fish during the summer. I just find that it's not as good as some of those other times of the year. Now, the big thing is, where am I utilizing the dead walk? And really, the dead walk for me is a technique or action where I know I'm going to be fishing a tight area, whether that's like a tule pocket or that's underneath a tree or down a dock, something that's tight, that there's not a whole lot of length to where I'm fishing, where the strike zone is quite small. So we're going to be talking about a theory that Southern Trout Eaters, Matt Peters, has talked about in his Southern Trout Eaters video, and that is the rate of stall. Now, most guys know about the rate of fall, which is how fast a bait sinks. You know, there's ROF 1 or ROF 5 and so on and so forth. Rate of stall basically takes that same principle, but instead of going vertical, we're going horizontal. And so the rate of stall basically is a measurement of how fast or how slow a lure will work through a zone or a strike zone. So with the dead walk will have a much slower rate of stall than a bait that you kind of just work out, like a triple trout or something like that, to where you kind of just wind it out and it's done. It also kind of has, the dead walk also has a small area in which it will stay in. So with a glide bait, obviously you can get a glide bait to go super far left and then back super far right and super far left, super far right. But with the dead walk, it's not going as far as a glide. And so you're able to keep it in a very small pocket, a small strike zone, for a much longer time than a glide bait or bait that you can fish out. Now, why is this important? I find that sometimes, whether it's pressured fish or just how the fish are just acting that day, sometimes they just want a bait to sit in that strike zone for just a little bit longer, whether that's for them to see it or find it, or whether that's pressure from guys always throwing something that goes zoom, zoom, right by their face. But if you bring do 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 do, and it sits there, and then you go back again, it's something different to show those fish. And you could also be fishing for fish that just aren't in the mood to chase down a prey item. So they might want to come over, investigate, see what it is, but then you pause it, and then you give it that erratic action again, pause it again, and it might give that fish a chance of like, okay, normally I don't see something that kind of sits in my face for this long, and it's right here in my face, it's giving off a lot of action without moving too far. I'm just gonna bite it. At least that's how I think about it in my own mind, is why the dead walk works as well as it does, is that you're able to get that rate of stall to be a much slower and keep your bait in the strike zone for as long as possible. However, the dead walk isn't just used for areas that are super tight, small areas. Like my buddy Phoenix, on our last trip to Japan, both of his big bass that he caught both came on the DRT, the Clash 9. But he wasn't fishing it under a tree, he wasn't fishing it down a dock. Actually, he was fishing it basically out in the middle of the lake, it seemed like. His first fish that he caught was like an 8.5 pounder, and basically we rolled up to like a rock pile that was sitting in that 15 to 20 feet of water. Phoenix casted out the bait, he cranked it down, then he began the dead walk. And what we did at the time is we started adding these Zappu board weights to the bottom of the bait. And what that does is it just helps keep that bait suspended without it floating too fast up to the surface. Now, kind of what I was saying earlier, like you want a floating bait for this application just so you can try and figure out like, okay, I want this bait to float much slower so I can keep it in that strike zone for a little bit longer without it being up on the surface. But you also kind of want it on the pause to kind of just sit there for a little bit. Just like a jerk bait, just like how most jerk baits you want a suspending jerk bait. So after you rip it, it pauses. And a lot of the bites you get is when you pause it, and that's exactly what happened to Phoenix on that first fish. Cranked it down, dead walk, pauses it, and as he goes to try and dead walk it again, there's a fish attached to his lure, and it's an 8.5 pound largemouth. An absolute stud. Then his first ever 9-pounder in his entire life came doing the same exact thing, but this time was from shore, and we were fishing the mouth of this canal, and at the mouth we're sitting in like 12 to 15 feet of water probably. Casts out, cranks it down just a little bit, and he starts working the bait again, giving it a pause, and as soon as he paused it, he catches a 9-pounder from Lake Biwa. So it doesn't need to be around super tight areas or in like this foreseeable or just visible strike zone. It could be just over structure or over suspended fish as well. So it's a super deadly technique for when the fish are not wanting to cooperate with like a glide bait, but they also don't want like a soft bait or something too slow. They still want a hard bait action, something that's flashing, but they don't want something that's like do like too fast forward. They want something that kind of stays in that area for them to want it and give off a lot of action. And that's why the dead walk can be fished anywhere, whether it's tight areas or kind of over structure or over suspended fish. The dead walk can be absolutely deadly. And finally, who does the dead walk apply to? The dead walk can apply to anybody. I've caught fish with the dead walk at my local urban spots. I've gone to lakes and I've caught it. I mean, as you guys just saw, Phoenix literally went to Lake Biwa and caught some really big bass on the dead walk from shore and from a boat. So this technique can be really utilized anywhere and everywhere for anybody that wants to try a technique that is just slightly a bit different than how other guys might be fishing a body of water. Now, you can fish it on pressured bodies of water, you can fish it on just absolutely fresh fish. Either way you go, the dead walk is absolutely deadly. I really recommend this technique for guys fishing around those tight areas that want to get a bait in there. Give as much action as possible without leaving the strike zone, and the dead walk is probably the best way to get it done, honestly. Other than that, let me know if you guys have utilized the dead walk in your own fishing style. If not, honestly, give it a shot and let me know how it goes for you. With that being said, thank you guys ever so much for watching another video. If you guys watched my last video, the beginner video, you're probably going, is he wearing the same clothes? No, it's the same day. It's too hot to be coming out here every single morning, and I'm tired of waking up every morning. So other than that, thank you guys ever so much for watching. As always, go out there, chase your dreams, and John